Right then, good evening, everybody. I make it 8 o'clock, so let's start this month's conversation with Dr. Easkey Britton, author of Saltwater in the Blood. So, Easkey, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, I love so much about this book. I can't wait to get into it. But it's also it's not often we have a world championship winning sports person with us as well. So it's fabulous on so many levels. But like the journey that you go through in the book is amazing. So we're going to get into all of that. We're going to talk culture and expression. We're going to talk nature and connection. We're going to talk belonging and place and language and embodiment and what it means to feel and why it's important to feel stuff as well as think it. All in the course of an hour. So I don't know how we're going to get through. For those of you who've not had a chance to catch up with the book or understand who Easkey is, it's Dr. Easkey Britton, surfer, writer, artist, filmmaker, coach, marine social scientist with a PhD in environment and society. A lifelong surfer, taught to surf at the age of 4. She now channels her passion for the sea and surfing into social change. Who better could we have to talk to us? So, Easkey, thank you so much for joining us. You look like you got wet hair from the sea. So have you just come in from the sea? Tell us you have.
Yeah, I thought it would be fitting way to start this conversation to have just come from the sea to bring some of that energy with me through the interweb. And also, yeah, we're very fortunate. I've moved back home where I grew up in the northwest of Ireland. So I'm a tiny kind of seaside village called Rosnavla, where my dad learned to surf, I've learned to surf, and then the next generation are learning to surf. But no surf today. So it's full high tide with this supermoon. And it was like a beautiful, silky, flat cam. I'm definitely more of a dipper than a swimmer, but it's just a wonderful way to reset after a long and tiring day, or a week.
Absolutely, and so fortunate to have that on your doorstep. And
Yeah.
and you've already done one of the things that I was most looking forward to about this evening. You've said Ross Nowler in your beautiful accent, not in my clumsy Yorkshire accent. So there's going to be how's it pronounced, Ross?
Rosnala, yeah.
There's going to be lots of that because my Gaelic pronunciation is terrible, and there's lots of lovely Gaelic in here that really brings depth and warmth to the book. So I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about that. But you talk there about your, you moved back home, and there's lots of homecoming in the book. But yours was a really special upbringing, wasn't it? I mean, you're named after a break. You seem to be surfing from the moment that you could stand. I mean, what a fabulous immersion in the natural world and the creative world as well that your parents have given you there.
Yeah, it's just so fortunate, by the nature of my birth and being born into a surfing way of life. So both my parents surfed, and my dad and his brothers in particular were the early kind of surfing pioneers in the country, really, to start to initiate the sport back in the 60s. And my dad was 12, which at the time, with no wetsuits or even access, even trying to get surfboards. And so I grew up with all those stories of ways of like trying to innovate and make do with what they had, and learning from traveling surfers and things like that. But just that kind of fueled the whole sense of that wonder and curiosity and exploration for me and my sister. And then where we've grown up too, with the sea and on our doorstep. But that said, that alone isn't enough, because I think up until more recently in Ireland, our relationship with the sea in terms of connecting with it for our own sense of pleasure and recreation has been always kept at a remove. It's a place more so, especially the West Coast, which receives the full brunt of the Atlantic Ocean. The West Coast is very much a place to be feared, and all the stories around it were all about the dangers and encouraging you to stay away from it. And so much so that it was even thought it was better off not learning to swim in a lot of these coastal communities, which would have been traditionally fishing, although they're nearly all gone now. So that if anything did happen, it's better to go quick rather than prolong the inevitable, which is madness. So thankfully, fast forward to today, and it's like people are, surfing year round on my beach and swimming, and then there's the Water Safety Ireland, which I mean, it's always something I lament that wasn't taught much more as part of our schooling in our early years, of that like understanding of the sea and water and how to be around it. But they now tour around the more rural kind of peripheral coastal areas, and even small island communities, teaching swimming courses every summer in the ocean as well as in the pool, which I think obviously is a huge difference there too. But it's I think that's essential, like that part of restoring our connection with water and the sea. For me, that's kind of been a missing piece, I think, culturally in Ireland. So we're seeing this reclamation happening, so we've always had that relationship, and that's why the Gaelic words come into the book, come into Saltwater in the Blood, because they really speak to what we once had and perhaps lost along the way for different reasons. That was a long answer.
It's a wonderful answer, and it made me. There's lots in the book where you rediscover Gaelic heritage and share that with us. And it really made me think, and I've had this sense when talking to people from Ireland before, that from our perspective, just across the sea in England, we don't even have those stories that you've got. We don't have that deep connection, and I understand that you, as a society, you'd feel that that's been lost, but that there does feel like a deeper well of culture to dip back into, and to pull this meaning back out in a way that I think we've lost in a lot of England. Maybe not so much Scotland and Wales, but England certainly feels lacking that indigenous culture. It must be a real richness that it probably took a time to appreciate. You probably didn't first of all appreciate what you had around you.
Yeah, and it's both. I mean, nearly every place has experienced these waves of colonization, and even when you go back into like the history of Ireland too, it's been happening for millennia. But it's maybe testament to that place connection that we have here that seems to be so strong, that the stories still remain. We still have the mythologies, and the legends are still taught, and they're what's interesting about them as well is they're all really connected to place. They have to only make sense if they're set in context, so they speak to a relationship with a particular mountain or river or part of the sea, which is also really interesting. So it's that there's always those ecological messages that exist now in what we've left of our the mythology and legends, and the kind of revival around that's happening again, it seems. And then also in areas where Irish is still spoken, and then in our place names as well, which is really interesting.
And we'll probably talk about it a bit more later on. But what's the word? To me, it looks like it's pronounced Dukas, but I can't be pronouncing that right for the connection.
Yeah, so there isn't really a word for like landscape in the sense that we might think of it today in the Irish language, and there's lots of words like that in the Irish language, where there's a word that has like such a complexity of meaning, and Dúchas is probably one of them. It's actually used a lot to refer to our heritage, but essentially is about that innate place connection, and recognizing that there's this exchange happening and interaction. So we're shaping the places that we inhabit as much, but they're also shaping us, so that we come from these places that we've been, kind of make us who we are. But me being obviously a surfer, being born where I've been born, the sea has completely shaped and formed every aspect of who I am, and continues to. But it's also that it's dynamic. There's that continuing evolution, which I like as well, because we talk about maybe the heritage and mythology and even our history. There isn't a stuckness to it. It's actually really alive and dynamic in the present moment, and we're continuously kind of evolving with it as our relationship with place evolves as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does, and I think that's in this. Gosh, we're getting straight into the deep stuff, aren't we? But
of course,
in this moment of where where I think a lot of people can see that we've lost our connection with the natural world, and to a degree with ourselves, because the two things go hand in hand. That is at the heart of so many of the problems that we're facing in the world. It's and that's a startling revelation, isn't it? That it's this thing that's nourished us. We've forgotten about it, and that's at the root of so many of our problems. Wow, what shocker! Because it's not really surprising, is it?
No, and I mean, like, when we're talking, so the words, I kind of mean that, and I was inspired to, I suppose, do that, and I felt encouraged by reading the likes of, like Braiding Sweetgrass and Robin Wall Kimmerer's work. And there's a lot of, I suppose, around connection to that sense of who we are and our heritage. In particular, I think in Ireland, and then how it's taught in school, a lot of shame is held around speaking or using Irish. For fear of judgment and it, not passing our exams in school or whatever it may be. But this of just actually just being brave enough to start to use it, and even though so that it isn't lost. And so I've learned an awful lot from a lot of people who've done a huge amount of work in this area, especially the Indigenous leaders the world over. But so what we're talking about are just words like an amazing collection of words that have been kind of collected by Moncton McGann, who has gone and visited a lot of these rural coastal communities that we're talking about, to learn about the words that describe particular places. And I mean very, very specific. So it could be to describe a particular hole in a reef that a wrasse is found in, or a particular sound that a certain shape of pebbles make when they're rolled around by a particular type of wave. And of course, Robert McFarlane would write a lot too about the language and then these rich ecological place meanings. And one of my favorites that I mentioned in the book is Uignas an Claddagh. So that Uignas an Claddagh describes the sense of loneliness of the shore. You sometimes feel that when you're on this kind of maybe a deserted, windswept beach, or you can almost, even the word Uignas an Claddagh, you can kind of almost feel something already.
Almost on
or it can also,
isn't it? Yeah.
Like all Irish phrases mean many things. So it can also mean a haunting presence of people who lived and died long ago. And sometimes you do get that eerie sensation, at sea, of course.
Now I have to check something now. So I've referred to Gaelic and you're talking about the Irish language. Is there a difference? Am I talking
No, it's the same. I mean, Irish is Gaelic and Gaelic is Irish. It's Gaelic is, yeah. The Irish for Irish.
That's fine. Just checking. Didn't want to be putting myself digging myself into a really deep hole as we go through the conversation. So let's talk a little about writing the book, because there's a bit where you talk about an unrelenting sense of feeling overwhelmed by writing the book, and I can understand why, when you've got all this understanding of language and all that sort of stuff, and this fabulous life story that you're trying to get across along with a message in a book. I mean, where do you even start? That must have been a really difficult process. So how did you work your way through putting all this together into something that made so wonderful sense as the book does?
It took time and a really good editorial team. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? A book, and writing a book seems like maybe such a lonely pursuit, and then it's usually just the author's name on it, but it is such a collective, collaborative effort, and that's part of the process I really love. But the other part of the process I love, and how the book writes itself for me, is I need to be I'm sure we'll get to embodiment as well, but I notice my writing practice is very much that if I'm the topic I'm writing about, I need to be immersed in it. I need to feel it. So a lot of the book was written, unsurprisingly, as close to water as possible. And then having, just actually go away and have that change of environment that offers new insights and that perspective shift, or to get out of those mind ruts. And of course, there's nothing better, I find, than water for doing that. And then now we've got all this amazing new science to evidence and support, oh yes, actually, water does really enhance that sense of creativity. So that's my number one writing hack, is go find water for starters. And get close to it when you're writing.
Um,
And when you get stuck, just get in the water, like leave the book and the laptop.
see, I've got a confession to make now. Can't really swim, and I have never once set foot on a surfboard. Now, I feel like I shouldn't be confessing this at this moment. But maybe that's why it felt so much more. I guess I'm always trying to find a different perspective and bring our community lots of different perspectives. And I mean, you had a you talk about stories needing to help us understand the diversity of experiences. It's one of the quotes that you talk about in there, and I guess that's what I was looking for in featuring the book and reading about an experience that is pretty alien to me. Like when you're talking about being going down after a wave and having the patience to stay down until the wave has passed, and then coming up and the bubbles are popping and you've got all the negative ions. I mean, it was as if I was there. It was
Oh, wow.
It immersed me in that moment in a way that I think really great writers can do, and you have done. You've made that magical moment. And that's absolute credit to you, because you're so bloody good at so many things. How could you be good at this as well? It's not fair. Leave some stuff for the rest of it. But it's like, it's quite a story to tell, though, isn't it? And there's bravery by talking about, menstruation and natural cycles and sensuous feelings and things like that. I mean, it's out there. It's all of you that's out there on the page, isn't it?
Yeah, and you kind of, in a way, and I get into that process of the writing more freely. I just let whatever needs to come out, and then obviously the editing comes afterwards. But I never really write at the time with thinking about who the audience will be, or that the book's going to be out in the world read by so many people. So sometimes I forget, and then afterwards I'm like, oh yeah, that's in there. But yeah, no, it is such a journey.
And you could see it, though. It didn't feel contrived. It felt like, this is me and this is the story that I've got to tell. And
it's definitely, and you're right, it's definitely a challenge to write about something like surfing. I mean, there are other books on surfing, but well, for starters, it can seem like quite an exclusive club unless you're in it, and it has its own language and vernacular and like surf speak as well. It almost seems like indecipherable and alien in itself, and then it happens so fast. Like, how do I know the feeling is so visceral and embodied, but then to sort of slow it down enough to then try to put that into words without losing the essence was definitely a real challenge in the book, but one I really enjoyed. And then, yes, writing that in a way that if someone surfed, they could appreciate it, so it wasn't at all dumbed down, but also someone who had never been immersed in the water, as you say, or experienced what it would be like to be caught by a particular wave, but to be able to bring them along. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And I really appreciate reading the book. And I mean, you talk about surfing and you say that it demands a letting go of expectation, requires our total present in the moment, so that we take notice of our surroundings. And from that, I got this real sense of being in that flow state, and the importance of being in that flow state. But I guess I've always thought of that as a fairly same thing, whereas for you, you've experienced lots of different moments of flow in the book, from being in the heat of a championship to being about to drop into a big wave. How do you experience those differences in flow states? How does it manifest, and how do you embody those states?
Oh, really good question. Because as you're talking, what was coming to me and how I'm describing maybe surfing, it could also describe maybe music or dance or certain arts in the same way, in terms of the immersion you can get and how you can just get completely absorbed in the moment. But perhaps maybe, like, say, music feels like much more, it connects you with that inner internal world, maybe even more. Whereas with surfing, there's that interconnection, but at the same time, you're really connecting to this environment around you in a way that it no longer feels separate anymore. So there's this added, I think, dimension going on. And then whatever, it's interesting because whether it be, you know, a 20 or 30 foot wave, or being in this sort of time pressure of a 20-minute final that's being judged at a world championship, or it's the entering the flow state, like the process and what happens in that embodied way is actually kind of really similar, if not the same. I've only ever been able to have those peak experiences whenever I can really shed and let go, which is easier said than done. Any sense of expectation or attachment to an external outcome or an extrinsic reward, and then it's also this, I suppose in those moments there also isn't any room for doubt, but I don't even, the opposite wouldn't be that I'm filled with so much confidence that I know I've got this, you know. So there also isn't any of that sort of ego or swagger. It's just, I think what it comes down to is that the ability to sort of shed and let go any of those expectations and surrendering to the moment, which I think is the ultimate act in surfing, and in many things that help us then enter the flow state, is that, for me, that feeling of just that deep appreciation and gratitude for what I'm experiencing in the moment, which is this insanely intimate, enlivening connection with the ocean, with waves, that's just so hard to describe, but it's just really allowing myself to feel that in its sort of simplest, purest form, which can be hard when there's lots of distractions going on, and there's, you know, coaches and people shouting at you to do this or perform a certain way, or you have a judging criteria, or you have the, you know, the very real fear of drowning in the big wave scenarios. But there's something about, yeah, so it's that, like, kind of the slowing of everything down internally kind of is what happens for me in my body. And then this sort of shedding and letting go is sort of the best way to describe all that external stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, by going just back to that pure essence of, like, what is it I'm here for anyways, what is it all about, and just essentially that feeling of love, isn't it? That's probably what I'm trying to get at.
Oh,
And that for me is the when I experience flow, that love or pleasure, or
wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with me. And as you were
yeah,
talking,
nice to riff on it. Thanks for asking.
it was really cool. And do you know what was really interesting? As you were talking about letting go, I was reminded of one of our other authors, Andrew Terrell, who walked 7,000 miles across Europe.
Wow.
And it's compiled it into 2 separate books. I mean, it's like this epic journey. And the thing that he learned from that is you need to let go. So you have these very time compressed moments when you needed to let go to immerse yourself in it. And he had this immense, I think it was like 18 months or something that it took him in
Wow.
and that was his learning as well, was the importance of letting go. And do you know, that's why I love reading these books and having these conversations, because I think you're all out there and you're like natural philosophers. You let the natural world seep into you, and you channel that experience, and then you serve it back up to us in written form, and it's beautiful, and we're all much richer for it. So thank you. But it's fascinating the ways that things cross over. And I kind of wanted to carry on talking about cultures and their expression, because I loved when you were talking about the surf culture in Papua New Guinea, and how surfing was more of a feeling thing, no charging into the wave or pushing too hard. It was languid but not lazy, more fluid. And actually that feels like an expression of a different culture, like a way of expressing that. And you must feel that yourself in the different ways that you see surfing happening around the world, and the different scenes within surfing. It's all forms of cultural expression, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. And I've learned so much through surfing about those cross-cultural connections. So surfing being my sort of vehicle or lens with which to experience the world. And then it also is an amazing way to kind of foster that immediate connection, because you have a shared experience with people wherever you are in the world, no matter whatever differences, so-called differences there may be. And yet then it's interesting one, because surfing, how it's seen in the world, is a very Western kind of construct and culture, and that goes with it in terms of modern surfing. And it can be very domineering and really kind of take over a lot of cultures where it emerges. You really see that in places like in Indonesia, in particular in Bali. We're kind of surfing and it kicked off there in the 70s. They have some of the most amazing waves in the world, but really seeing how it actually got kind of overrun in terms of like that consumerist sort of shadow side of surfing and surf tourism to cater again to sort of more Western needs and desires, without that integration from the, of the local culture, and also then the inclusion and access for local people to participate. And it's slowly changing now, but there is that kind of, there's the real tension. And then in places like what I write about in Papua New Guinea is fascinating, because they have a really ancient connection with the act of and art of wave riding on these timber surfboards. And interestingly, now there's sort of like, it's kind of come full circle, and they've now set up a timber surfboard making kind of workshop, combining contemporary surfboard shaping skills with their more traditional approach to it. So it's a wonderful revival. But I think case in point there was like, it was a lovely eye-opener of what happens when, yes, surfing can connect, but it can also cause tension and conflict. But then when it's done in a way that sort of really honors and amplifies the inherent kind of values of the culture where it's emerging, it can be actually, I've learned so much from those places. Yeah. There's so much more I could say on that. The Papua New Guinea story is like it's like a whole other world or book.
Honestly, each of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, we could spiral off and spend a whole hour talking about them. It's one of those books that can take you off in so many different directions. But I love that
because it challenged me in how I viewed surfing and what I thought surfing was, and thought, oh, that's not the only way to surf. And there are many different ways to experience the act of wave riding, or that connection with the ocean. And it's just also really good to sort of have your perspective shaken up like that.
Absolutely. And also to have a common lens to look at lots of different cultures through. So this is how they do surfing here, and this is how surfing works here, and that must give some interesting perspectives. And then so you took that very immersed in the sea and salt water, and then over the book your story changes, doesn't it? And you moved away from that global surf championship lifestyle to a more grounded, a more rooted approach. But and we'll talk a bit about that. But as well as that, you also picked up your studies as well, and that must have been a huge change from the physical training side of experiencing to trying to rationalize it in science. And what led you to that then?
Oh, such a good question. I think it's, for me, one of the outcomes of that early connection with the ocean, especially through surfing, is the fueling that curiosity and feeling this sort of from very early on, that innate pull the ocean has had on me, or water, and seeing how that happens almost universally in different ways. I suppose the paradoxical relationship, of course, it instills such awe and wonder, and is an amazing source of inspiration, and it's a really powerful shaping force in so many cultures and societies. But then there's also the other story of it being this place of like the fear and the danger and the risk. But all the same, it's like there's no escaping our human relationship with it, and but that's always been a kind of driving question for me. Of trying to better understand that human relationship with the sea in different ways. And then surfing, of course, brought me out into the world as a way to travel and see, experience so much, and begin to see some of these commonalities across cultures as well as the differences. And then, long story short, wanting to, like, I don't know where that my energy is wanting to continue to unpack things, unravel them, and you're like, from what's going on here. Layer by layer. And maybe it's because of the unknowability of the ocean. Like, I've been immersed in it my whole life. It covers like over 70% of the surface of the earth, and yet we only have explored about 10% of it or less. So the whole 90%, we don't even know what's going on in there. So all of that kind of feeds into the wonder, but also hang on a minute, what is going on here? There's such a huge, powerful force in our human lives, and yet we know so little. And so that's what now I've kind of landed in this space of which I mentioned in the book, on blue health. So that relationship in terms of the health of water and the ocean, and in terms of our own health and well-being. So, which speaks to, I suppose, more, I look at in context more of the healing and transformative powers of water, let's say, which of course, again, is another thread that runs through cultures the world over, about the power of water as medicine, and why there's so much mythology that involves water.
And just as you're talking there, because from reading the book, I learned about the feminine attributes to water, and as you're talking about that healing there, that also has a very feminine essence to it. So, and are the two things connected? Sorry, I'm taking advantage of the fact that I've got a very knowledgeable person in front of me, and but I'm really interested. Is the feminine of water connected with that healing property? Do you think that's where it comes from?
Brilliant question. And yes, to the point where I guess I've kind of got to, like, scratch the surface in Saltwater in the Blood and start to, on reflecting on my own experience, realize, okay, I think that this is what's going on. So then I unpack that a lot further then, actually, in my next book, Ebb and Flow. Really, that's sort of a real central theme in it. But it was something that, okay, I knew and felt, but then I thought, well, how is this reflected elsewhere in the world? How do other people experience it? And looking at both the science and then the indigenous knowledge traditions, in particular, when it comes to working with water, that's mostly led by women in a lot of indigenous cultures, are the water keepers, and doing that work to protect water, because of its life-giving properties and its power to heal, and then that women also are the ones with the power to create and bring forth life. So there's that they see that I see that as really closely entwined. They can't separate them. And then you begin to look at it in terms of, like, through a more political lens and one of power. It's just really interesting to see. They both speak to the story of water and our seas and oceans. Like, they're an incredible, I suppose, measure of the health of our society, as it were, and who we are as a people, how well our water is doing. And it really, I think they're one and the same story, that oppression and, systematic oppression of women and women's rights, and then all minority rights, and tied up with all of that, and the inequalities there, is also then the domination over natural environments, and in particular water, and the need to sort of manage, dam, and control the flow. Yeah, which really represents that flow of the sacred feminine, which is always associated with water. Water is the conduit for that energy, that life force. And it's the science is speaking to that as well, like our more modern conventional science these days is really speaking to that now too.
But and again, you were able to draw on indigenous wisdom that recognize that and show how a lot of this is wisdom that we've lost as we've oppressed things and exploited the natural world and each other for the benefit of the benefit of the few. And I think it's really powerful, and it's great to have people bringing these stories back to life and reminding us that these are things that we've always known. It's just that our system has told us to forget them, has forced us to forget them.
Yeah, it is. It's the story of which is a total myth. It's the story of separation, that we're separate from water, from nature, and then this is about trying to sort of rewrite, reweave the story of connection back into how we're living. And for me, then realizing as I was looking at like what is my relationship with the ocean through surfing, that's really what it was doing for me, was helping restore some of those lost connections.
But for you, it's not it's not a piece of theoretical research or a historical document that's found. It comes from your own embodiment of that connection and your own experience of that, which I think really sets such a solid foundation for everything else that the book holds. When was the point that you realized that you'd got this connection, then that you felt it, you were part of it? Was there a point?
Yeah, very early on. I just knew that, I think I realized it when, at school, no one else surfed when I was in primary school as a kid. So again, even though we're like a coastal community and we have one of the best beaches for learning how to surf, that's not catalyst enough for most people to be able to give it a go, at least when I was growing up. So it was still seen as something totally mad to do, too cold. So that I was the only one that was looking forward to like the winter in my school. And I get excited, because I knew this, in terms of and also then learning about the cyclicity, that the power of cycles and how we live. It entirely shaped our family life, because we were always waiting for like the cycle of like the seasons to turn, autumn to kick in, low pressure systems in the North Atlantic bringing storms, aka swell, and waves to ride. So I was anyone like, and then not looking forward to summer because it was going to be, the sea would be flatter and calmer and not enough waves to surf and things like this. I realize it. I don't know if it's that, it's definitely that connection, but we call it in our family like a good addiction. It has that real addictive kind of qualities to it. But hopefully it's a healthier one. But I definitely would see it growing up, like my dad is the same and I'm the same. And then we get these withdrawal symptoms if we don't like get our fix regular enough. And then but it changes. Now I kind of less seeking the big sort of thrills, as it were, and putting myself in those more higher risk situations. And now it's much more actually going back almost to that sort of sense of just needing it to soothe my own nervous system or to feel that sort of pleasure and reconnection with my body again. So it's become a very bodily thing, and not at all performative or the need to actually perform or do something on a wave. It's just to get back into that feeling, sensing body, especially when there's so much to trigger us and pull us out of ourselves in the day-to-day of our lives right now.
Absolutely.
Regardless of almost who we are. There's no avoiding it, and it takes a lot to try to buffer constantly, I think, against that.
Yeah. I mean, it was an unfair question to ask you when you felt that sense of connection, because there is the bit in the book where you talk about being at like 7 or something, and in the back of the van and listening to the sound of the sea for the change and for the swell arriving and stuff like that. And that's a deep connection, isn't it? That is there from a very early age, and that is such a gift that your parents have left you with. So it wasn't fair, but as I was reading and learning about the your Gaelic phrase "dukas," I really thought, do any of us have that in our modern lives? Do any of us have even the feeling of belonging and knowing about place? Never mind that reciprocal bit of the place being part of you as well. And it it speaks to our disconnect in society, which has switched us off from that which nourishes and sustains us.
Yeah, and we've kind of also maybe turned our backs a lot on the more, I suppose, that deeply spiritual connection that would have been held around water, and water then involved in so many of those life transitions and ceremonies. But it's now, I just get wildly excited when I see this new science coming out that's, at first it kind of was evidencing that, oh yes, the soil is alive and trees speak to each other, and there's this whole mycelium network. And then they're slowly kind of discovering, actually, the same is true for water in so many ways. And that even who we are, sense our own identity and sense of self as humans or human beings, we've kind of got it all wrong as well, because who we are is constantly changing. Well, so much of us is also water, but that water is always cycling through us. And then the environments we immerse ourselves in, especially water environments, because water carries so much, and the ocean has such a rich diversity of life down to the microscopic and the microbes and everything else. So it's kind of insane what's in just 1 liter of water. And then that actually alters our microbiome on our skin and in our bodies, if we regularly go to the water. So I write about in my other book, Ebb and Flow, about how the ocean leaves its fingerprint on us, which is research that's been done by a pal of mine, surfer scientist as well, Dr. Cliff Capono from Hawaii. But he's brilliant at weaving together his indigenous knowledge with his biochemistry, to evidence just that, how we become actually part ocean, akin to other marine mammals, if we're regularly in the ocean. And it's sort of particular to that body of ocean or water body as well, which is amazing. And then we carry that with us when we come back on land. So we're not even the same as when we went in. It's amazing.
Becoming part
even
of
breathing the
fact.
aerosols now we know is the same thing.
Yeah. And you used the phrase "weaving together," and that reminded me of that other Gaelic phrase that I wanted to hear you say. I don't really want to say it because it scares me just to look at it on the page. You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
Yeah, and then it's one of those phrases that will be pronounced totally differently depending on where you're from in Ireland. So it's "feita fuita." Feita fuita. Yeah, so it's spelled, for people who are listening, Fighte is the first word, and then I think it's Fuaighte or something wild like that. So it's typical Irish word in that you don't pronounce it at all like how it's written, but essentially, means woven into and through a place, an experience, which I love it. It's like that. The water itself, the ocean, gets woven into and through us, and the same thing is happening vice versa. So it speaks to that the reciprocity, that kind of kinship that Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about so beautifully.
Yeah, and I think that's the reciprocity is the bit that's probably the hardest for most of us to get, in the sense of knowing what about what flows back in our relationship that we've got no knowledge of. So we're just looking out at this relationship and going, oh, that's what I'm projecting out there, and this is what I'm getting back. But we don't know what the other side of that relationship is, and that's the fascinating thing, isn't it? It's like, well, what does a tree think when I sit underneath it? Like, we've got no ability even to go there. But I think just opening ourselves up to the idea that tree might be feeling something, or the water might be responding to our presence within it, just expands our connection to it. And again, it's like you were saying about becoming a little bit of the ocean and taking a little bit of the ocean with us. It takes a little bit of us with it as well.
I love it. And what you're saying, what's coming up to me is really realizing that if you look at surfing, then maybe that's what's actually going on, is this way to try to communicate because of that kind of direct exchange, interaction that's happening. Like you're really entering into a relationship, this commitment with a wave for a few moments before it's gone, but with the energy of the ocean itself. There's just not many things like that, I think, in
the
really, planet that we can do, where that brings you that close to maybe getting a glimmer of understanding of what the other the other side is sensing and feeling. Yeah.
Years ago, when I first started my business, I ended one of my newsletters by asking a question, really, which was, why are surfers better environmentalists than rock climbers? And I guess it's a question that sort of puzzled me all the way through. But I think I've found an awful lot of the answers in reading your book. And just as you were saying there, you say about surfing is a collaboration between what the surfer wants to do and what the ocean is offering. And that's quite different to rock climbing, where you go up to a cliff and you go, right, well, that's the line that I'm going to take and I'm going to do it. And it's like a dominating thing. I'm going to dominate this piece of rock in a way that you don't seem to be able to do in surfing. It's genuinely a relationship rather than someone being in charge and the other thing just having to take it.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know enough about rock climbing to comment on that side, and I think what we're talking about is how I would love surfing and surf culture to be all the time, but and in its essence, that's what it is, and why you see such a strong, like, active grassroots movement around it with environmental organizations that have been established by surfers, and the surf community working quite in such a coordinated way in various coalitions worldwide now. But also there can still be this sort of apathy or inertia, because surfing can also be quite extractive, where you're going and pleasure seeking, and want to sort of go and take your extract your joy or whatever it is from the ocean, from the waves, without actually connecting. I think you can actually do that without connecting in a way that's meansurely, that you allow all of the rest in, if you know what I'm saying. And it sort of gets reflected a bit too. And I think it's more like that surf industry really tries to capitalize on what the essence maybe of surfing is, in a way that's actually just another harmful form of greenwashing. But where you don't see enough changes happening in surfing when it comes to innovation that would be lead to much more sustainable materials. So unfortunately, we're still really dependent on petrochemicals for wetsuits and surfboards. But that is shifting, but it's still hard, even in even in a community you think will be switched on. We have a ocean connection, we get it, and yet we're able to just not really consider the wetsuits that we wear, and the production cycle of them is incredibly harmful. Like neoprene is one of the most toxic substances that makes up most wetsuits around the world. But now we're seeing a change happening, which is really exciting. So with the advent of Ulix, which is a plant-based rubber, and different brands or companies starting to take that on, and performance-wise, it's a close match, I think, for neoprene. But still, I was surprised at like the kind of when the news kind of broke in a groundbreaking documentary called The Big Sea, which was made independently just by two surfers, on the sort of toxic impact of the wetsuit manufacturing. And the surf industry is kind of either remains quite silent, or there's been a lot of pushback, rather than like, okay, wow, we really need to consider the big picture here and look how we're going to we're going to sort of own this and change things. So yeah, there's still a lot of influence. That story is still very strong, of even within the blue health narrative, of the link between, you know, water and well-being, and things like, you know, even ocean and surf therapy, which are like amazing. But we run the risk also there of kind of continuing that story of commodifying the ocean and water and nature for our use or our benefit, even if it is a positive. You know, it's good for it boosts my mood, so I'm just going to go and yeah.
So the ocean becomes the place that makes me feel better,
which is wonderful, and you would hope it leads to that connection. But it is often that, yeah, the really important part to always center in the conversation is the acknowledgement of what water is itself, and the reciprocity, like looking at actually what would that really look like if this were a meaningful exchange. Yeah.
And what do you think it would look like then? What would a meaningful reciprocal relationship with water, what would it look like? What would it entail? How would we know when we got it? And what might be the signs that it's emerging?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's even just, maybe does it start, like I begin to kind of pick that apart in the book of beginning to understand even, you know, what are the, you know, I'm going to go back to place names. So like, what were how was this space and place known before me? What meaning has it held? Or if, you know, it's maybe a bit easier for like a river and a lake, but just as simply that as a relationship of getting to know the place, the ocean, the water body by its name, for starters. And then maybe it goes to also then just bringing an awareness. I find I write about in the book, and initially it was more about how do I manage my energy and fear when I'm in those sort of high risk situations or high stress scenarios where I'm really facing a challenge, be that in competitive surfing or in big wave surfing in particular. And then it was really realizing, oh, whatever, you know, becoming more aware of the energy I was holding in my body. If I was bringing that into the water, then that relationship I would have with the wave would just not flow. The connection wouldn't be there. So I realized, I had to actually do a lot of work on how I was showing up, because what I brought into the water affected everything. So even there, I think is an example. And of course, that speaks to attunement, that kind of power of developing this greater capacity for attunement. So that again, that relationship of connection with the world, the living world around us.
And you've got some great practice that you talk about, that you share to do that. So from when you were competing and you would splash yourself with water to your grace and gratitude sessions with your sister. I mean, those are really powerful things that I think it's easy to overlook until you reflect on that conversation that we just had, and it's, how do you bring that relationship to life? And you're teaching us how to do it there, which is fabulous, and must bring an awful lot of meaning and benefit into your relationship, because you're centering it much more. You're much more aware of that, and start with an awareness that's a gratitude as well, which is such an important practice, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And so yeah, then we finding a way to sort of almost to acknowledge that feeling and give thanks afterwards, especially I realize with surfing, when surfers are the worst, they're very quick to just like rush straight out into the water without a thought, and then get all our waves and then you leave again. So yeah, it's sort of that for me has been the process anyways, kind of a slow recovery or a deepening of that connection all the time. And I feel like that's going to be lifelong. And of course it brings its own challenges. Sometimes it'd be easier not to do that, because once you start down that, you do start to feel everything, and you become much more aware and conscious of actually, well, how is the water doing and the ocean doing? And of course it's mostly, in a lot of cases, not doing very well. But that again speaks to, I still think it's really important to let that in, and allow those feelings to be there as well, the more difficult ones.
Absolutely. And I think we're we're sort of back to cycles here, aren't we? In the there's if you don't let that in, if you don't feel it, then you're not going to do anything about it. So there's a cycle from, you know, not knowing and not caring to knowing to caring to doing. But there's also, I think, and I take a lot of hope, and I think I got sense of it in the book about cycles within society and how society ebbs and flows and comes and goes, and it does feel like we're changing direction now. I have a sense of hope that more people are starting to recognize the things that we're talking about, the problems that we've induced in the system, and that we are agents of that, but that means that we can do something about it as well. We're the solution as much as we're the problem.
Yeah, and that sometimes I think when we talk about cycles, it's normal that there is this, that it's natural and it's healthy actually, that it's part of what allows there to be life, and it's the power of transformation. It's that like death and decay and decomposition, and like I love this time of year because it's starting to like switch into that mode where things are, you know, starting to die off again, you know, and trees are losing their leaves. And but yeah, that it's a reminder, isn't it, maybe not to fear that so much, because out of it then it does create this amazing space of potentiality, and then it's on us of course what seeds we want to sow, to, you know, and allow to emerge. But it's also, I think, it's the importance, and I think maybe this is what cold water swimming has taught me more than even surfing, because it's that like hit of like it's such an uncomfortable thing to do. Like every time I'm like, why am I doing this? And you're getting in a cold body of water, which, you know, it's always cold in the UK and Ireland, even in summer, and it just creates that, at the very least, a discomfort in the body. But the importance then and power of when we allow ourselves to be with that discomfort, to allow ourselves to feel the full spectrum of what we're feeling. I think that's really what I feel as we're being called upon right now in this time of crisis, is actually not to shy away from that, but also the importance too of not, even though it seems it is really urgent, not rushing it. I'm kind of contradicting myself, but the importance of actually just being and feeling first before rushing into action. And that when it comes to cycles, remembering that there has to be that phase and stage where everything seems like it's stopped and gone dormant, and it's actually resting and recovering in order then for there to be any change to happen. Otherwise, I think we run the risk of just kind of unfortunately repeating ourselves and repeating the mistakes. So yeah, it is a wonderful time then. I think we're lucky that we experience the seasons in this part of the world, I suppose, but to remind ourselves of the creativity and that reflective time and the need for rest that comes as well. So yeah.
No, don't flannel us now. We know that you're not looking forward to a rest. We know you're looking.
I'm not going to get a rest. I'm a mother of 15-month-old twins, but I microdose when I can.
But I mean, like, again, when you're talking about cycles, I absolutely love the idea from Polynesian culture that when the surf was good, it wasn't a time for work or warfare, and that cycles out there influence the way you respond, and you don't just go through life head down, just charging ahead, doing the thing that you always do day in, day out, regardless of what's happening out there. And actually you take notice of that and you respond to it. And that's, for me, that feels like the great message of this, from you standing on a surfboard, to you articulating the problem with microplastics. It all feels like the same thing, all feels like part of the same great cycle.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. I hope so.
It really does. It's a lovely book. So I guess the question is, where are you going next then? So you've done so many amazing things and you're so young. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do with this connection that you've got and this ability to share it with others?
You really good question. I having to put some of what I've just been sharing to the test of like, can I actually stay in this space in between, which I write about in the book too, this space in between the waves. I'm really comfortable, like, you know, in action mode, riding waves. And there is nothing like, I'm a new mom, so there's nothing like going through that journey of pregnancy and early motherhood, of it being like a bit like that. How to enter like an 18-month flow state without walking 7 or 8,000 kilometers, but sometimes it feels like that, like you've done that in a day. So yeah, just really trying to hold that space to not rush into the next thing, and to try to actually put some of those things I talk about in the book into practice of, can I just presence myself with what is and see what emerges, and trust that I, you know, don't have to have it all planned out. But of course, my curiosity to better understand our relationship with water continues, and certainly hasn't lessened since becoming a mum. So I'm really keen to like unpack that a bit more too, when it comes to the relationship between women, water, and our bodies, and the wider society, and that transformative power of water, and how we transform when we become parents. So who knows?
The cycle is going to start again, isn't it? From you know, you're going to have little ones who also know what it's like to sit in that van and understand what the changing sound of the waves means, and that's really special.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm moving myself there. Right, I'm going to stop before I start crying. Easkey, it's been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have to apologize to everyone. Normally I say, yeah, this is everybody's conversation. Everyone's welcome to ask questions.
Oh, sorry, everyone else.
And I shut everyone.
Hijacked it.
Sorry, it's all mine. I really sorry. Normally it's very much more interactive than this. Glad you enjoyed it. But I'm sure you'll all agree, it's been absolutely wonderful to spend a small amount of time with Easkey. Easkey, thank you so much for giving your time to join us. It's been brilliant. The book's been brilliant. I've loved it. I'm sure everyone else has. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, a real privilege. Really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for the lovely comment. Yeah, great.
Good stuff. Right, that's the end. If you want to put your camera on and do the wavy bye-bye thing, you can do. Then if you're fed up of it, I'm not fed up of it. Hello, James.
Yeah, nice to see everyone for a moment.
Doing all sorts of stuff. Well, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're out and about, James. That's great. Thanks for listening in.
Inspirational. That's what we want, Damien. That's good to know. Thank you very much.
Yeah, lovely opportunity to share with you all. So really grateful. Thanks.